Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday train with the 2MK team. As always, therefore, we are playing Guilty Gear on this Tuesday. And today, we're going to be talking about some stuff that normally would get overlooked if you were just learning beginner things. Because there's little specifics of the game that could help you build up your game more, but generally only helpful for optimizations once you already understand your game plan and most of the things you want to do. So we're not really going to be talking so much this week about game plans, but rather about observations of particular aspects of the match. As noted, this is a loser stays on US East Coast lobby. So feel free to join us if you want to test anything with your characters. Or learn anything against ours. As you know, we often mention using your Blitz Shield in certain situations. But we never really talked too much about how that move actually works, or any of the specifics of it. The Blitz Shield is done, you can set it to be one button, but it is done by hitting one button plus your heavy slash. You must have at least 25% meter, and if you hit with it, as in specifically you hit your opponent with it, it gives you back half of that. If you whiff, you lose the entire meter. So really, you can actually, once you have enough meter and are pretty confident you will land the hit, you can make this a fairly often used part of your style. Isn't really something you have to hold back on too much if you really believe it's going to be helpful if it's going to hit your opponent. Tension in this game has very many conditions on when it can and cannot build up. For the most part, it builds up normally until you make certain actions which lower the chances of it building up. By manipulating this, you can keep your tension gain high and therefore decide what you want to do with it. Part of the reason why you'll notice that my style does not involve many Roman cancels is because if you use a Roman cancel in the current version of the game, your tension gain is reduced quite heavily after that Roman cancel. In fact, after you've used a Roman cancel attack of any kind, you have a full 6 seconds where your tension gain is down to a fifth of what it normally is. So you can't say, okay, let me do this combo which will solve my problem and I'll get the tension back after I Roman cancel it, because that doesn't actually work. As demonstrated there, you see that Kai makes nearly no actual gain in tension from using that move. So, while it is possible to do things like get charges off of Jam's throw by Roman cancelling it, I've drastically changed the amount of resource I have available for certain things. Meaning that if your plan was to play mostly with Blitz, for example, or you needed the Blitz in the matchup, you can't go, okay, well, I'll use this first, and then you make it back afterwards. Depending on why you need the Blitz, the speed that you're moving at, and the opponent's style of play, you may not be able to regain enough tension meter for it to do what you want. You also lose a little tension gain after using the green block in the game, the faultless defense, but it's not really that bad, and it's probably not a problem for you. It's only a very short time when this happens. Well, not a short time in terms of fighting game time, because it is 1 full second, but that's still a decently short time given the entire point of faultless defense that you were blocking. By nature, you had to be blocking. Similarly, if you use your dead angle attack, you will lose tension charge for about 4 seconds. Meaning that your counter attack is not going to gain you enough tension, probably, to use another dead angle attack if you mess up and end up in a bad situation. This is to help control the pace of the game and not make it so that the player is constantly trying to push through. Defensive options that then lead into hits all of the time. Otherwise, it would be basically constant. But tension is not as simple as meter in the basic sense. Tension is literally a measurement of momentum. So when you've heard us talk in the past about how different characters will tend to have meter advantage in matchups, this isn't necessarily because they're hitting more or less. It's specifically because the way they take actions, the sequence they take the actions in, and so on, all affect it. The less time you need to spend defending, the harder it will be to build up tension as an overall thing. It's literally possible, therefore, to build more tension by walking after doing a certain set of things than actually trying to get in on the opponent. If your opponent has run away from you after a long string of good offense from you, and they really don't want to interact with you again, you can literally gain tons of tension by just walking forward at them. The more moves you manage to do well in sequence, especially out of neutral, without having to backdash or similar, the more tension you build when your opponent retreats from you and moves forward. In this way, it's actually somewhat similar to the Vorpal mechanic in Under Night in Birth, but a little less transparent, let's say. In fact, you can also gain quite a lot of tension by being hit if you are being punished for an attack. Specifically, if you baited your opponent into counterattacking and they failed to land their counterattack after you had a good build-up of tension, blocking will build up more tension for you in some cases than for them, especially if they had to dead angle or Roman cancel out of your pressure. So when you hear us talk about how tension in a matchup favors one character if they play a certain way, it's not as simple as, oh, you're hitting this button, hitting that button, and the more hits you land, the better it works. However, hitting buttons, moving forward, and those things do help, definitely. So, in this case, let's watch the tension meters a little bit more and see why it turns into this basically rushing down fest from Jam, even though she's not necessarily trying to land all the attacks in question. Her aim is to keep moving so that she always has more meter than Jack-O does. Obviously, this style of play suits me rather well. It is also why it is not a problem for me to not keep up Jam pressure. You do have options to play Jam the other way, which is mostly keeping other people's minds on all your options so that they don't respond as much. Note, for example, that my tension meter, despite having taken more damage and had more trouble, heavily surpasses Jack-O's and is likely to stay that way. The balance is in fact so high that I just have free meter now. If you can keep that momentum going and really understand your own character, you get to a point where you have basically infinite meter. Zoning characters are usually given long buttons for their normals so that they can keep their tension up while not necessarily trying to approach the opponent. If my opponent gives me a chance to do a move that will move me forward, but they are unlikely to actually come out of it with being able to hit me, then this is strongly in my favor. For example, you can see how much meter I gained just from getting hit there. Generally, obviously, you should avoid getting hit, but if you have enough health in this game, you can honestly pay health for meter if your tension was high enough as it was. If you were already on the offense and you have enough of a life lead, just let it keep on going up. Whatever damage your opponent does is just incidental to you, really. However, of course, since this game at higher levels is a bunch of very high damage situations in very short spaces of time, you generally don't want to be messing with this too much. Don't go wild just because your opponent hasn't gotten an answer to something yet. However, you should recognize when you've got them on the ropes and build up your own tension really high, or rather, the rate at which you gain it very quickly. For me, basically, at this point of the match, every dash allows me to build up enough meter for one blitz. Mainly because I just attack like a maniac and never stop. Tension gain is generally not affected by anything else. Your specials affected, your normals affected, and your forward movement sort of pays off for it more so. So you do have to consider it as hitting as in you must make contact with the opponent with your normals. You can get some tension gain for just doing special because they normally leave you unsafe enough. And then you can quote-unquote cash it in by movement and approaches. This is another reason why we sometimes suggest doing moves that will knock your opponent far from you or make them want to retreat. Because even if you do not necessarily chase them with the intention of attacking them, the fact that you got that far means that you are now in a situation where your attention balance is high and you can get free attacks. You can just gain meter for walking forward. Your opponent now has to push you back, or they're going to end up facing your blitzes, your supers, whatever else, given the simple amount of tension gain that you will have as an advantage over them. This is particularly effective for Jackal because it basically gives her infinite air fireball. She has to reach a certain spacing and timing, but that sort of thing is quite useful for her. So in this situation, she's basically lost all of that. By retreating, she no longer has most of that tension gain option, and by using the Roman cancel, she's now basically gotten rid of all of it, meaning that she now cannot use her meter so freely. Fortunately for her, since most of her uses of meter are in fact to do the same moves, they tend to build back up the tension gauge. This is what I mean by infinite air fireball. She's able to build up and keep the tension high even if she gets clipped back or has to retreat by using the same tension gauge. Being one of the few characters whose tension gauge enables moves that build up more tension gauge. Meaning that for Jackal, this fight is even more rhythmic than it appears at first. If she can poke Kai, even on block, if she can make Kai block a few times from far away, with the absolute knowledge that he will block, her advances in the space means she can build up more meter, which means she can defend the air better. But at this point, anything she built up was lost, so she might as well defend out her houses and wait out the rest of that because she already has meter. She can therefore cash it in later to build up more meter. Since most matchups cannot be drastically changed by this, rushdown characters have whatever bonuses they get. Defense characters who are facing certain situations just don't get to have them. But understanding where you are in the rhythm, let it just soar to be trapped in your head, will help you know whether or not to attack, defend, or whether or not your opponent is probably thinking of attacking or defending if they have certain meter setups. Or at least keep you informed as to how much meter they're going to keep on getting out of certain situations. For example, even Axel is quite good at this because Axel can keep his high simply by clipping the opponent from really far away. He doesn't have to get that close to do it in the first place. If he can avoid having to backdash, he's probably fine. But you can see already here, even basic movement from Jackal is raising her meter quite a lot. In fact, basically everything she does just rebuilds the meter she uses to do it, naturally now. But that will kill her momentum quite a bit. So, she specifically decided, okay, I think I can close this out without using any meter now. So I'm going to allow my Roman cancels to kill my meter momentum to get this mix-up and have the mix-up do the ending. So, while you shouldn't necessarily overthink your options in this regard, for the beginning, just try to be aware when you have actually been on offense long enough that advancing is in your favor. In other words, if you could use your meter in a way other than Roman canceling somehow to get advantage, be it blitzing against certain styles of flow, using supers to set up situations, or in Jackal's case, just outright using the meter to enhance your moves. If you are on a roll, you should be able to decide right then, is this good for me? Should I just keep going for it? Because if you build up enough meter, even if your opponent does manage to push you back, you now have a ton of meter to defend with. And if they hit you to do it, they're probably going to give you even more. Furthermore, depending on how you actually do it, since blitzes don't affect it in any way, dead angle does, remember. Since blitzes don't affect your meter gain, in fact, they basically halfway pay for themselves. This is why we often suggest using them in matchups when you've already managed to get a lot of momentum. Blitz is a good way to stop your opponent from wanting to counterattack in particular spaces, and if you hit with them, you just get to keep on going. So, we've discussed many times that Jam versus Axel has a lot more to do with timing than anything else. Axel can keep her out more or less indefinitely because all of her approaches from the longer range are stoppable. Some of them are harder to stop than others, but they're stoppable. But what Jam has above most other Rushdown characters is that she more or less has infinite meter. She is unstoppable in the meter department. The question therefore is not can Jam get in, it is can Jam manage to not take too much damage while doing her stuff. Watch the meter gain right now. Your skill with this character, therefore, is definitely more so about can you get your opponent to respond incorrectly or not manage too much damage. The key, therefore, for Jam in a lot of cases, is to hit the opponent as many times as possible, rather than specifically focusing on whether or not she's actually hurting them. It is also therefore possible to make certain opponents very frantic about their defense because she has so many options all the time. Therefore, a lot of this, as you see, is about me landing stray hits, rather than bothering to get a long setup in terms of maximizing damage entirely. Keeping the opponent off guard is more useful and valuable to me. Other characters who are really good at this are, of course, Neo and Milia. Chip is actually not as good at this because of the way Chip's attacks and movement goes. Chip is good at pushing you away from him and then attacking while you are away, but it doesn't necessarily gain him a lot. Johnny, of course, has a lot of benefit here, because Johnny can suppress other characters' meter gain in many ways altogether. Similarly, if Axel can manage to keep his position against an opponent without actually walking backward at all, his meter gain stays higher than if he does. That said, if you haven't managed to reposition yourself in the appropriate way, it's not really helpful, because then you lose meter advantage in some other way. But just remember that while we all think, oh well, hitting a blocking opponent a lot is good because it builds up their risk meter, you should definitely also consider how much it's helping you keep your own meter gain up. Especially if you manage to get a far away knockdown that will let you run up behind them and gain some meter to do other things. So one easy way to think of this is, does meter help me in this matchup a lot? Because if you end up feeling meter really helps me in this matchup, but I need to conserve it, sometimes that's not quite true. Sometimes what you want, especially if the meter is helping you prevent your opponents from counterattacking, you don't want to conserve it. You want to keep on using it so that you can keep on having even more of it. You can see a flashing tension gauge there. This usually indicates that you have managed to get it to the maximum possible. At least that's what I remember it meaning. I should probably check on that. Once you've gotten into that state, there's a whole bunch of little bonuses that I will probably just read off to you, honestly. Oh no, that's completely different. That's to do with instant kills. I knew I had something to do with instant kills, but it was supposed to do something else as well. Jackal has the advantage that while one is distracted with her minions, she can do other things that will help her build up gauge. If she has enough already, it becomes relatively trivial to do. So sometimes, basically, if your choices are to go forward with your blitz, or to backdash because you do not have enough meter for anything else, if no other decision you make is influenced by the things I'm saying, you should probably think about at least that one. Assuming your blitz hits, it will give you back half of the tension you use, which is an eighth of the entire bar, but it will maintain your position and your meter gain better than backdashing or attempting defense will. So back to correcting what I was mentioning before. There are 3 different ways that the tension gauge can look. So let's see if we can manage to activate more of them. Obviously the first one is just it looking completely normal. But if you're really observant, you can see a little extra something. Part of it, as shown last time, was actually just a matter of the framing around the gauge itself glowing, but you can also see some other things. You see that white pulse that goes through the tension gauge right now? That white pulse is basically telling you that your tension gauge gain is high. They make a lot of little visual things to make sure you understand the situation. For example, you now see the sparks indicating super is possible. You can also see, for example, that the opponent is low enough on health that my gauge becomes gold, and that generally means that instant kill becomes possible. Still, since you don't have time to watch any of this in a match, and there's a chance that my information is completely wrong about why they have different looks to them, It's kind of hard to find this information sometimes. Feel free to find it, look it up, let us know in fact if you do. But since I'm actually playing and talking, I probably won't be going too deep into that right now. All you need to understand is you can in fact make that gauge build up faster. And when you have recognized that you have been in a defensive state long enough that you need to rebuild that speed, you can make decisions based on that. Should I keep defending since I basically don't have a lot anyway? Or should I go for it? But don't be stingy with that meter, especially if there's a chance that using it will let you continue your offense long enough to keep going forward and then therefore potentially earn it back. It is a timed resource. The more you use it successfully, the more you will get of it, and therefore the less you have to worry about running out. It's why sometimes it feels like it takes forever to get to full meter, and sometimes it's basically just seemingly appearing out of nowhere. Once you are a full meter, using half of it for a Roman cancel definitely can't be that bad, as noted here. You will probably end up converting into damage and not getting much more attention gain out of it, but you've already got half left in case you needed it, and have a lot of time to build up other things. Generally, you should think of it as, if you need Roman cancel to keep your momentum going, and don't expect to need the meter right after it, then use it. And if you're using your Roman cancel, as we sometimes do, just to get in, understand that the payoff of that getting in, especially if you do it in a certain space of time after the Roman cancel, will leave you without as much meter to use if you fail or by some means get pushed back out again, and you're going to have to re-earn it somehow. This is another reason why we often suggest that the player tries their best to master their dust attack, because the opponent blocking dust, especially well-spaced dust, is just free meter in every way. In fact, if you can afford to pay the health, you don't even care about getting punished for the standing dust. similarly, deciding I'm going for the finish and being able to go, I'm going to use my Roman cancels rather than waiting on blitz, is an important decision to be able to make. This is part of the reason why clipping the opponent out of the air and then going for just even the tiniest of jump normals to keep them hit can be such an important part of some characters' style. If they don't need the very specific spacing, this is often in your favor regardless of anything else you're doing. You've managed to air, your opponent is falling relatively slowly. If you have anything that even clips them, that is the meter gain option in that situation. Take that action based on the need to keep your meter rising and worry about what happens on landing afterwards. Although usually you can just use blitz. This sort of play also leads to exactly that. The higher likelihood that you will catch your opponent in goal first. Instant full meter for a character like Xrd is a good way to get going again. So this comes down to your targeting skill. How quickly can you get your opponent to a position that you think will let you bring them down? And once you've gotten them there, you have either enough meter to close it out, or enough to make them nervous enough to lose regardless. So from there, let's look at more intentional ways of keeping the meter gain going. Normally I use Gekurin, which is not a good idea because it's unsafe. The opponent tends to either get caught or block it and not respond, but it's not really a good move to be doing in those situations. But Jam has quite a few other decent options for keeping those things going because she has evasive hitboxes. The Gekurin is most useful at the position where the opponent thinks they can make a counterattack of a particular kind. Basically, it means that a very buttonsy opponent who wants to stop you from keeping them pressured and hitting more buttons, you get to use Gekurin or her instant jump, effectively dive kick, because of their tendency to counterattack. It's not because this is the great move, in the sense that it's not really punishable. It's because you don't expect your opponent to be in a situation where it matters. They want to counterattack you or get out of the situation that they're in. So you get to land it for that reason. But with this much meter, it's hard to lose in a particular way from here. I could, for example, use the bit 4 Roman cancels now. There's little chance I'd be worried about it. Understanding your opponent's tendencies and wishes can allow you to use moves that they will block simply because they think, well, I'm stopping you from hitting me with that. But if you're safe after it, you may have built up enough tension to just win naturally in that way. Making punishes much more important in this game than in most. If you can continually do moves that cannot be punished, and then capitalize using the meter it gains you, then you have a solid strategy. Even Army Rabbit's style of slight retreats with Kai generally is not enough to make sure that he loses the speed of his tension gain. It happens more when he gets pushed out and has to deal with it fully. But that, for example, is a good move just displayed. It is most likely going to be blocked in most situations. It is punishable if not spaced correctly, but it's a good big command normal style hit that most people will just go, ha, I saw that coming, I blocked it. But depending on what you're doing, you don't actually care. You specifically wanted them to block it. Because I need a little extra meter, so I'm going to push on you so that even when you push me back, I get more meter for blocking your stuff. But now, having decided to pay that for the Roman cancel, there's really not much point in worrying about meter gain anymore. It's easier at this point to lame it out, because there's literally a couple seconds on the clock, and you can't gain that much meter during it, so might as well win by timer. There are a lot of situations in which just doing a move that your opponent will end up blocking at max range is just good for your meter gain outright. Similarly, just like that, catching the opponent even with a smallish attack when you've knocked them out of the air is straight benefit to you. Look at that Kai meter go on up. So now, Kai can decide, am I going for super or am I going to cash this in with my Roman cancel? If he goes for super, he still has advantage. But at this point, he's probably lost quite a bit of it. So, Roman cancel becomes another good idea here, simply because, might as well. Note that blitzes have no effect on tension at all, as in they don't build it up or down when you do these things. But let's look at the other way that this match can go. Jackal can absolutely just hit her longest button, the Wrecking Ball, and keep Jam out in most situations once she has enough minions to stop Jam from using her command dash. And Jam can't really stop Jackal from getting those minions. Normally, the punch minions are the ones you need the least. If you want to gain meter in this matchup, you want kick minions early, and if you want to keep Jam out of the air, you need slash minions early. Once the kick minions are out, Jackal can basically just zone. Because basically everything Jam does becomes reactable, except that move. But this move is not a good idea to do. Meaning that Jackal is the one with all the meter gain advantage here, even though Jam technically has a lot of meter herself. It's not as if Jackal can't do the whole infinite air fireball thing right now. She absolutely will get away with that. Since that entire fight went away from the houses themselves, Jam didn't really have a way to pressure the situation enough either, making it very momentum heavy. If there are not any minions close by, you'll get Jam using command dash and trying to get some momentum off it, like that. Since of course if she manages to hit Jackal, the momentum goes away. But getting rid of minions is not an answer to these situations. Since Jackal's meter basically never falls. Therefore, as you've seen, at this level at least, trying to do without Jam's Ryujin, her Dragon Kick, even though the move itself is risky, Jam's movement becomes limited too much to do as she likes because she cannot do her command dash while in the air. Against Kai, it's not really a move you want to use as much. You want the command dash whenever you can. He's not really a character who has a lot of ways out of it, while trying to play footsies in the standard way, that is. Therefore, a lot of what you see, rather than it being me trying to open a Kai up when I dash at him, is just building meter. In order to make sure he catches every jam air movement, Kai has to be fairly risky. Since she's so good at putting him in positions where certain buttons will hit cross up, not everything I'm doing is actually intended to hit him at all. It's just confusing. But note that tactically speaking, you have to make Kai block a certain number of attacks first, otherwise you're just dashing around the place doing nothing. And of course, this really does not matter at all if the main reason for meter in the matchup is to use a Roman cancel. If that was your primary reason, then this isn't necessarily the best way to go about it, because then you end up using the Roman cancel and then you don't have any more meter gains. Far less any more meters. Of course, once your opponent understands you, it will become harder to do things like this, but you're still overall gaining something out of it. But now you can see, basically just movement alone is enough to build up my meter to these levels. Of course, it doesn't necessarily matter in this matchup. You have to have a plan for what to do with all that meter, or you haven't achieved anything. So what's my payoff with this? In my case, it's mostly counting on how annoying that move is. If you consider it from the perspective of Jam having a move that builds up risk meter and generally pushes the opponent out, if I could get to the max tension gain and have that move available on demand, then I should generally stop thinking of it as something to use for the purposes of actually cancelling or hitting the opponent or anything. Just use it as a big puffball shield to prevent situations I don't want to deal with entirely. Against certain characters, this maintains Jam's mix-up motion pressure and confuses people, or forces them to take more risks. Jack-O has a similar capacity in this match. While she cannot generally manage as well against Kai with just her air fireball, her actual super is dangerous to him, because it has the whole ground explosion thing. But the question becomes, how can Jack-O maintain enough meter to use the super? Well, since she is nearly impossible to zone, it comes down to using the standing dust and making Kai uncomfortable. Because while he will probably just stay grounded, stay safe, block out the air fireball all the time, he doesn't deal with standing dust as well. But you can already see there that just literally walking forward can stress Kai out from Jack-O's perspective in this case. Similar to Viking, having that move creates air mix-ups that Kai has to deal with, but he does have more options than most characters, so it's not that easy. Understanding how to utilize Jack-O's various timered abilities in order to set this up is also difficult, but can pay off over time. Similarly, she benefits from that slow walk speed generally, as she basically walks in right behind minions, but is generally able to respond immediately. Since building up this allows her to build up tons of meter by just walking along with her minions, she doesn't have to worry at all. She basically gains meter for laziness. And compared to some other characters, she can gain a lot of it. To the point where opening up certain characters is completely unnecessary. You can just do the intimidating pumpkin walk and leave you basically unable to take any actions. In fact, the slow methodical movement Jack-O is capable of is intended to be used alongside minions. All she has to do is basically try to take up the space on screen between minions where they are not quite at the moment. And her situation generally improves. In this position, for example, while Jack-O herself is not going to get her minions off to any attacking starts without defending for a long time and therefore not getting much meter gain, the houses themselves are fine and will get to level up quite a lot. meaning that when she reaches this point in the match, she can actually spend some time just hanging out with her little bat people. Kai has now managed to set back the situation, but now he has to deal with level 3 houses and being trapped between Jackal and said level 3 houses. No matter how quickly he tries to deal with the situation, tactically speaking, she's made his life a nightmare. But that sort of movement management is dependent on having a decently good idea how quickly you will gain meters for just moving. And there's that meter advantage I was looking for. How do I use it though? Well, as I said, I can try to convert using that button, or I can be a pain with that. And I mean a real pain. Having a general idea, therefore, of how quickly I can rebuild to get that particular move again means that my opponent's best option is often to do nothing at all and stay there, but that will just let me get more meters. Now, on the other hand, as you can see, is both punishable and doesn't really create the same sort of feeling to the opponent at all. And since comboing into the move is generally pointless, the key goes back to where it was before. If you expect your opponent to counterattack or defend, you should set up things based on getting to land more hits at spaces where they don't get to do anything. Note that, for example, that even my opponent's counterattack is massively favored toward my meter gain. Now this is a very crude way to play Jam. I'm not saying that you should play Jam this way. It is, however, a demonstration of what you can do when you have figured out how to use your meter without causing one of the other situations mentioned. Axel, for example, is also good at this. Axel's super tends to put the opponent in a situation where they must generally keep blocking, and Axel gets to keep on hitting them. Generally, this is a problem for him because it puts them next to him where he doesn't normally want them. But if they don't have any meter, most people don't have strong enough meterless reversals for Axel to not just want to do this. He will be able to pummel at them until they try to move to at least the mid-range. Once they get to the mid-range, he can push them out to a far range. And adding that all together with his massive meter gain means that if the situation does turn funny for him at all, he can just do it all again. But since most things in this game don't require any meter, and not every character has strong free supers that you can just make sure that your opponent does next to nothing about. One of the more important things we will probably be talking about for characters like Kai is learning when to blitz. Kai is not really a character that needs to blitz that much, as he has a lot of ability to cover space himself without doing any of that. Most of the time, if Kai wants to hit you with his sword, he just will. He has a lot of range in front of him, and evading his attacks isn't so clear-cut, or relatively, by most standards, you can't call it easy. So he generally wouldn't need to blitz most things. But for example, against an opponent who has good lows like Jack O, crouching blitz, because you do have to blitz relative to the height of the attack. Crouching blitz is a useful thing for Kai. In fact, generally you'll want a crouching blitz as a thing as a whole. The main thing you have to understand about this is that blitzes are done by executionally, not blocking. Meaning that if you want to do crouching blitz, you have to either press directly down or down and forward. Because if you do down back, there are definitely times where, depending on your execution, this will turn into faultless defense. But Kai doesn't do as well against characters who have a lot of good, strong, low profiles. Namely, himself, certain styles of Jam, Baiken, and Jack-O. When Kai has enough meter and can't decide how exactly to deal with them in neutral, it can be to his benefit to keep his stuff going by blitzing when the opponent is just outside the range of anything else you want to do. In short, if you find yourself in a position where you don't want to throw a fireball, and you're not absolutely sure your opponent isn't going to instant air dash, for whatever reason, that is Kai's blitz moment. Now, of course, this is not something so easy to see or get used to, but if you understand Kai as a whole, there are going to be times when it feels like a hole in your game where you want to hit one of your standard buttons to keep the opponent out, and you just have this feeling that things are not going to go the way you want. You don't want to, like, do Greed Sever, you don't want to do Vapor Thrust. That's the moment to blitz, because it will stop a lot of their lows, especially the longer ones, from causing him trouble. Similarly, if the opponent tends to do instant air dash stuff and he expects to have to deal with it but doesn't feel confident, you can blitz those too, in which case you generally need to stand there. But mainly the reason Kai wants to do this is because he wants to keep his pressure going with his longer normals, and he doesn't want his opponent just ducking out of stuff. So it's still more so an offense tool than anything else. I want to keep going in, but I'm not sure I can. Once he moves back into his defensive stance, it's not usually a good idea to use the blitz too much because, obviously, he will have slowed down the rate at which he will gain meter again, making it difficult to build it back up if he happened to need it for some other thing. But, as noted, what's this other thing he would need it for? This is often why you see something that seems to be a defensive tool used to keep pressure on people. Because while that is not strictly its purpose, if you have good momentum going, it's a decent way to go about it. At high levels of play, you may see characters like Leo use this a lot. Leo is so good at keeping that sort of poking pressure up that it's basically cheap for him to just use Blitz in situations where he is finally out of range and it looks like the opponent might not be able to... that he might not be able to keep his pressure up on the opponent due to spacing, but he can make sure that they don't hit any buttons. But this is not a substitute for playing the matchup. This is just all to help you understand why your meter behaves certain ways and what you can and cannot rely on based on the matchup in question. For example, in this matchup, Omni Rabbit often needs to use meter to get in. As a result, often has to roam and cancel, and that means that once he does get in, whatever payoff he has won't come with more meter to do it again. That allows you to decide more specifically how to go about your tactics, when to retreat, and when to go for particular risky things, simply because, at least earlier in the match, you may not be able to make a plan for winning out without taking some risks. So you might as well take the risks while you have advantage in meter building. If you're not confident, for example, that your Roman cancel will pay off, at least make a plan around that so that when you use up the meter, knowing that it will be difficult to get more for a while, then you just chill out, don't actually try that hard, and don't go making any actions that rely on you having more meter. Because it's just not going to happen. Now, as noted before, we're combining the information about Axel, namely that you can get in on him by getting to max range and then approaching from the air with your faultless defense, with the fact that if you do approach with faultless defense, you can't gain any meter for about a second afterwards, which again in fighting game terms is a relatively long time. It means that any combo you manage to land directly after breaking through his guard will probably not grant you as much meter as you'd like, and it means that if he retreats and you rush in after, you're going to have the same problem. It may in fact be to your best interest if you know you have a good strong mix-up, but your opponent is more likely to block the beginning of it. Depending on the opponent, you may want to go for that instead, simply because many mix-ups in this game are started from block strings and frame trap style behavior, meaning you get to land pokes on people to build up your meter gain method, and if you did manage to hit them with the mix-up and it worked, then you probably have stalled long enough that your faultless defense approaching moment has worn off, and you can now do what you need to. So as we've noted before, against this particular style of Kai, Jam gets to build up charges in certain things. But what is the meter building charge option here? And does she even care? Well, the answer to does she care is yes. But if you've managed it properly, once you've gotten enough meter, you don't actually need to charge the cards anymore. Still, charging them does give your opponent reason to approach you, which would give you even more uses for that same puffball charge. This is why it's so important for me to practice and master specific timings for certain moves. Because it's not as simple as, is this move going to hit or not? I have to think about, if I get blocked, have I managed to keep enough stuff going? Now, against a very defensive opponent, playing in this wild way is generally not the best option. Because an opponent with strong enough defense or enough retreat normally has built up a style that will counter the fact that you have gained meter advantage. So, make sure you understand what you want to do with the meter before you go into trying to keep it up in a specific way. In that case, I had a specific plan to use the meter built up. Not to buy time or create space, but to use the invincibility, since Axel would tend to push himself into the range of buttons more than, say, Kai or Jack O would. Ino as a character generally has more trouble with this than most because Basically, her supers aren't that great. However, Ino can do a ton of blitz things, and she is one of the few characters that can control her positioning using blitz in the air. Air blitz is normally not a useful thing for most characters. But Ino has a tendency to approach from the air in a way that she'd probably prefer for the opponent to not do anything. Given her vector though, they're not going to be able to try to go for a really early high response. She has a very limited height before a certain amount of time, meaning that they have to aim very specifically. Therefore, as you can see there, she can just use the blitz against certain characters. Axel probably not being the best option, but depends on what he's doing. In the same way that we would use a Roman cancel. Now again, this is specifically because her regular dash takes her into the air. She has a very clear idea of the trajectory. She doesn't have to stay low or go into the air and wait a little bit until she's high enough to do the air dash at the height she needs. She has a variation as she goes. And depending on her understanding of her opponent, she can use this for a lot of things. Now, the main thing this is used for is opponents with single hit upward counters to her approach. Axel tends to get away because he has more of a multi-hit thing going on most of the time. And therefore she doesn't have a lot of follow-ups. Either she'll get hit with the multi-hit if she was too far out and he clipped her fairly high up, or she'll end up in range of some follow-up from him even after successfully using the blitz because of how air blitz works. That said though, it changes a lot of the way that he might want to play the matchup in terms of positioning, making it easier for Ino to play footsies, send out notes, and just generally be annoying because she can actually now get a lot more standard forward air dash into dust button or other button style attacks simply because she knows the opponent can't deal with it. This is actually the solution to one of the problems she was having before relative to needing to do air super out of that move. Well, that dash I should say. Simply put, she doesn't need to. She has blitz for this purpose against most characters. Again, it wasn't really mentioned against this character because against Axel you have to have a read on Axel to decide whether or not to do it. That said, if you do have the read, you might as well go for it sometimes. This is probably most useful when Ino has managed to down Axel, but does not think she can reach him in time to launch an actual full attack. Axel cannot wake up into blitz with anything because he's not that type of character. And since, again, the main thing is I'm using this meter because I'm confident that my meter will build back up quickly, she should generally do it in the moments where she feels as if she has either put him too far away or must now stop attacking and reassess because of the range or the scramble or the weird interaction they've had in some way. She has the option in those situations, along with a ton of other options that probably create a decent mix-up. Making a defensive player's life relatively hard, honestly. One of the most important times you'll see this happen is when Ino has landed a hit with the note in a way that she wasn't expecting to happen. This is one of the most complex timings for Ino to get advantage in this matchup. And sometimes the only real way to get advantage is in fact to use that or to just throw another note. Depending on Axel's situation, throwing another note may not be a good idea. He may super, or he may set up something else, based on the distance between them. Fortunately for her, the distance between them in that situation is almost always the same distance she wants to use this technique. However, since Ino has the same problem as basically every other character and must backdash out after being hit by Axel once, she often loses a lot of her momentum in terms of building up meter anyway, making it all the more crucial to use this whenever she has the perfect moment for it. But again, it is a mix-up. She does not need to use the blitz every time. That's really not the point. The point is to use the blitz enough to make the opponent hesitate to anti-air immediately. Similarly, you could start from the side of going with actual standard attacks and seeing what the opponent does most of the time. Since after all, if they just block, you don't need to blitz, it doesn't help you, and you probably could just keep up your pressure. Against Kai, this is mostly unnecessary altogether. It's easier to use Ino's super from the ground to rift punish a bunch of Kai's stuff than it is to put a lot of effort into blitzing anything. He has a lot of good options that would not pay off if she blitzed them, and can obviously go high or low at a decent spacing out, meaning that she can't tell which blitz to do just off that. Her super, on the other hand, is a wide-ranging, very quick sort of thing with a long super freeze, meaning that Kai really has to respect it quite a lot. Unlike certain other characters, she doesn't even have to try to hit him or open it up with it by hitting him in the air. She can just basically use it as, we are slightly too far apart for me to hit you with anything else, but I have a feeling you're going to move, so I'm just going to do it. It further helps that this helps her deal with the fact that he will often wait her out, opening the opportunity for the standing dust again. There is one more thing to watch in terms of your tension though. And I'll try to mention it when the situation reoccurs, but the main thing you're looking for is a moment of faultless defense that fails in some way, resulting in a hit, usually in the air, followed by an air tech recovery. No, it must be that specific sequence of things that happens. The player must go for a faultless defense while in the air, somehow get hit anyway, and then recover out of it. So it doesn't come up all that often. So, we're back to discussing how to maximize all of the pieces put together in this particular matchup, mostly because it's the easiest one to understand. And you have the insight of me playing it, therefore I can tell you exactly what I'm thinking, or trying to do at any given time. No guesswork involved here, at least not from this side. At the beginning of the match, there's no reason to rush in immediately. You haven't started to build any tension balance yet, so there's no benefit directly to it. If your opponent is being defensive, you can use this time to build up cards and consider whether or not you want to take a certain approach in the first place. Therefore, she's the sort of character that feels people out at the beginning. But once she's gotten into that space of, I now have at least some pressure on you, it's often good to keep it going. Perfecting the timing of certain attacks means the opponent can't decide to take certain actions of their own at all. This has the useful property of also catching back jumps. Similarly here, I haven't built up any momentum yet, so I don't really have a reason why I must go in and subject myself to Kai's counterattacking. Now I'm starting to get a little somewhere, and he is cornered. And by using that there, I can keep it up. Because I knew the momentum was still on my side, I could be confident of building up enough meter to do anything to convert into the kill once I knew that my opponent had been opened up in basically any wave. But that is not a guaranteed way of building up that much meter. There are definitely situations in which that would not have been enough to close it out that way. As you expand this sort of repertoire, it also increases your willingness to use relatively riskier options for pressure. Similarly, Kai now has at least some advantage in terms of both meter gain and approaches, so it's sort of in his best interest to keep on pushing at least a little bit. He has enough of a life lead that it probably won't be too terrible, but more importantly, he also has a situation where if he really wants to just go ham with Ride the Lightning or similar, he can not only do that, but he can do it with the expectation that he can probably rebuild the meter pretty quick. Screen control, therefore, has come out on top, and look, meter's back. Now again, he doesn't have to use it for the same thing. The opponent is close enough that a Roman cancel could be a good idea, for example, as just shown. But getting that feeling in your head of, okay, I have enough momentum that if I buy myself some space to move, the meter will rebuild itself. That's what you really need to think of tension as. If you are feeling tense, that probably means that you have enough tension meter to build up more stuff. If you decide, I'm going to relax a little bit and be a bit more laid back about it, you should be able to expect that it's falling. Which again, might not matter if you have enough of it or if that's your game plan. It might be altogether better to have that be your game plan. But at least be aware that you're likely to lose out on certain types of tactics. You see it demonstrated here, for example. Kai let it drop a little bit earlier. And once he did, it didn't make sense to restart it. Not outright anyway. We could consider, for example, that Roman cancel to be useful simply because it gives Kai the corner and a bunch of space behind himself to defend. But when you've gotten yourself into that situation, you've decided, okay, I'm going for the Roman cancel, but this isn't going to get me the kill. My opponent has more meters, and so on. You should generally be, if not intending to stall, at least recognizing, maybe I should go for pressure in this corner. Maybe that's not my plan right now. I'll use all the space behind me that I've just bought with my Roman cancel meter to slow down a little bit. After all, no amount of hitting the opponent, other than managing to open them up, is actually going to get you that much more meter to do anything else. If you're confident that you can close it out and open up your opponent in the corner without them hitting you with something invincible or something, then go for it, but otherwise you might want to reconsider it a little bit. The Axel mirror is actually one of the more interesting ways for meter to work. Since Axel benefits so much relative to other characters, in this case, because Axel is one of the only characters, he is basically the character built for punishing himself. Against everyone else, you just push them out to a certain space and you're okay. Against another Axel, there's always a chance that something will actually happen to you after you've whiffed or been blocked with certain moves. But if you are at enough advantage, that might be what you want. To get the other Axel to do something risky, even if you take the hit, you probably still have a bunch of meter now. And, above all else, when two Axel are relatively physically close together, whoever decides to go for Blitz first is usually at the massive advantage, since the other more or less has to block. And while you'd think this is easy to deal with, okay, I'll just punish it, he's relatively slow in particular spaces and not necessarily the best for doing that. At longer ranges, it's much more likely that the opponent will have used something that will beat your Blitz. But in that well-spaced mid-range moment of confusion, Blitz is a good friend to you in this mirror match. So we're back to the question of what Ino actually wants to do with her meter in this matchup. Well, Ino manages this matchup particularly well by being able to just more or less safely use Note and not worry herself too much about the rest. This often implies that she will be out of the way and not doing too many things, and certainly that she won't necessarily be building up a bunch of tension, or tension balance. Notes are also not something she generally wants to chase, nor to do in a standard situation too much. And it's not as if Axel is going to let her play footsies. The simple simple answer is the opposite of what we've been basically talking about this whole time. She just doesn't have any good reason. Axel just has the meter advantage in this matchup, and by most standard correct forms of Eno play, as you go up through levels it changes to different things, but the interaction between the two characters is usually about the same. Eno doesn't really want to bother trying to gain her meter or deal with it. It just isn't good enough for her game plan in most situations to make it worth her time. She can occasionally use ground blitz at mid-range, mid-spaces where she doesn't expect to be able to do north in time. But that's about it. There's one good space, for example. Using it to replace chemical love at that spacing, when the opponent has already been dealt with, could help you somewhat. But not necessarily a lot. So, overall, she mostly doesn't care. There are some matchups where your character just lets the opponent get the meter advantage, and if you happen to get it, maybe you can think of ways to do it, but now, as you can see, these two build up a lot of meter against each other very fast. And it doesn't tend to have too many direct uses other than roaming cancel. But that's another way to look at it. If you build up meter really fast and you don't need it, mostly because you're flying all about the place, meter roaming cancel is what you want to do with it. If you don't need it, if there's nothing specific in the match that makes you go, I won't be able to do this or function in this way if I don't have meter, that's the perfect time to use your meter on just raw roaming canceling stuff. Or combo extensions, or whatever else you want to do with it. The high mobility of the two and how often they stay out of range of each other. If you watch, for example, the Grand Finals of Combo Breaker, was basically Daru Ino versus Teresa, and they just flew all about the place all of the time. But they were also willing to use the meter for those sorts of things because it'll come back, and if it doesn't, it's not that critical to the matchup. Incidental use of meter and random situations like that is the easiest way to think of the trigger for using Roman cancels just as part of the matchup. If you've got good combos, if you've got other stuff, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about people who generally don't know how meter should be used in any given matchup who don't necessarily have all these great Roman cancel combos, or even if they do, can't be sure that it will actually work because the player they're fighting doesn't tend to fall for that situation too often. If you find yourself thinking, what else should I do with my meter? Then it's a good chance that Roman cancel is the answer simply because you can't think of anything else to do with it. Being unable to think of a good use for your meter is generally a sign that you didn't need it that much in the matchup. And if you didn't need the meter that much in the matchup, Roman cancels are almost always the best way to spend it. As they are the wonderful default that handles most of the situations, and you're basically able to do them at any time. Kai, for example, doesn't really need his that much in the matchup with Ino because he only uses it when she starts zoning or being annoying in a particular way that requires his super. Other than that, he's mostly able to keep up with her regardless of whether or not he has any. And the optimal spacings and situations often mean that he doesn't get to build up a lot of momentum against her anyway. So, rather than worrying about how much momentum do I have, should I keep going or not, just Roman cancel if it suits you, and otherwise, if you're being zoned out, wait for the right moment, ride the lightning, and claim your victory. But let's take another look at that from a different perspective. Let's turn it a little backwards. Once Ino has enough meter, it strengthens her zoning game against Axel. Because she no longer has to worry as much when he manages to evade a note. She can keep up her pressure if she needs to. She can blitz certain things if she needs to. And generally make his life miserable. If she's been doing well keeping him out more or less so far, with note, she probably has enough momentum that she can afford to use the meter on that. Similarly, from the other side, you could think of it as reaching that amount of meter or that amount of tension build-up is her signal to turn it up, to start attacking. Because if she launches a note that actually evades, normally she shouldn't attack. If she has enough meter, she can afford to. His defense is too strong to break when he's evading notes properly, without the meter, but if she has it, she gets more options of all kinds. One benefit you have in this sort of matchup though, is that when you're playing a very offensive character of your own, the likelihood that the opponent will actually be trying to come in on you and not reposition themselves back out and create enough space to see you is small. Meaning that Jam really can take that pause rather than attacking again immediately, because the chance that the opponent is actually going to attack right away is smaller. Since basically sitting still for short periods of time does not terribly affect your tension balance, you can afford to take some breaks in your sit flow and system. Now, as we've noted before, the team tends to have trouble both attacking and keeping track of the rhythm of my attack. Which tends to lead to a lot of effectively mashing buttons at specific timing. Not as a general thing, it's not as if they just mash buttons all the time. But in moments like that, where it's not clear what is going to happen next, it can come up as a thing. This is why the method I used last time for Axel was to use that particular super. Because there's a large damage payoff for the situation where the opponent is likely to just hit buttons. Case in point. But I'm right back to it. Meaning I could probably have just done it again. Neither is this particularly useful to them, because if they start blocking, then I just get to keep doing pressure forever. But the important thing is, once I have enough momentum to rebuild it after doing it, I can keep doing the puffball style one to get to the spacing I want, and then keep darting around to build back up more eager to do either more of that or make the read that they're going to respond this time and go for the second super. Note if you look in these up, these are called overdrives in this game. But since that was OD has a different meaning in the FGC, we will continue to call them supers. Note that the MTFD does drain quite a bit of your tension room, and as noted, you don't gain as much tension for a second or so after using your faultless defense. The reason this is important therefore in this matchup is if Axel was keeping you out naturally, but you had meter to use before that, it's still a good idea to use it up in that situation, simply because even though you cannot necessarily gain it back, by using it, you are attempting to create a situation where you are stuck to Axel and hitting him a lot, and therefore building up that scenario. You don't want to try for it just to test the waters, basically. It would be better, in fact, to go for it and get hit a couple times without the faultless defense. And then go for the faultless defense when you feel, okay, they're expecting this, I can get in and start at least putting on some pressure to build up the balance. If you've been kept out for a while, you probably still have some meter and can decide how to spend it for that purpose. Furthermore, Axel is a character that makes you block a lot, but when your attention is high enough up, regular blocking certain of Axel's stuff allows you to build up meter even faster. This is why sometimes you will also see, despite the fact that we could block certain things, against characters where you don't need to do it, you generally shouldn't, because if you intend to go in after doing it, and you could have gone in anyway after regular blocking, all you've done is subtract 1 second from the amount of time you could be gaining tension quickly. But let's look at the wonders of Axel mid-range. When Axel does get back to mid-range, he tends to have two basic options for opening up his opponent's Axel: going over their head or going for the overhead. Adding the blitz to this helps a lot with being unpredictable enough to play out the full mid-range game. Especially since Axel is not a character who is very vulnerable to standing dust. It also discourages the opponent from simply walking away from him immediately. While still making them overall want to. This helps him to get certain low style attacks. And now with his buffs that we mentioned basically quite a while ago, with his cancelable Crouch Heavy, it's really helped out how much he cares about this aspect of the matchup. Since Axel is also not good at faking his approaches, if he does decide to come in, it's usually easier to decide whether or not you want to blitz as a result of seeing the other player approach. Since you don't necessarily have a way to beat them up or push them off the same way you could for other characters without risking getting hit, the blitz is a good option because basically you can't be hit at all. If you were worried about or expecting lows, you probably had a very different experience and wouldn't necessarily need to take that approach in the first place. You could jump off the ground, go for the overhead yourself, and so on. Neo now has enough meter to zone and try to make it work when Axel actually evades the note. Axel, on the other hand, is relatively meter starved and will have more trouble to deal with if Neo decides to take that approach. However, since her meter is not too good for much else, he doesn't have to worry about the fact that she gained it if she continues to go in. He can just play it out normally at that point, regardless of the fact that she has so much of it. But now that she has the options of both super... Well, that one didn't went away, but it's back. Options of both super and weird glitzy stuff. He can't just ignore notes. As she has too many options for what happens when he gets out of the way of it. She can respond with super, for example. Or if she decides that he's going into the air and coming in for an attack after the note, she should have just enough time in a lot of situations to do the blitz in question. This will make Axel hesitate more about whether or not to make certain actions in response to the note right afterward, allowing her to get to just zone more with him. You can see there, for example, the idea of, okay, I'm going to use burst here because this is a bad situation for me. I had momentum, I made a mistake and lost it. I don't want it to get reset, so I'm going to burst out of this particular combo, not because it's the one that's going to kill me, or because I'm particularly worried about it, but because it is the most advantage I can get meter-wise relative to this burst. Therefore, you can see that my game plan here is basically to understand how much meter I need to defend myself in very specific situations that I don't expect to even come up. Once I have that much meter, any excess can easily be put into roam and cancel stuff. Because I don't really care about the loss of meter gain here. The important thing is to keep the situation going in the way I want. Be as confusing as possible, fill up as much space as possible. And generally be a pain. because Ino is too careful to get caught in blitzes really, and so on. But if you're going to be moving at hyperspeed and trying to confuse your opponent as much as possible, even more confusion is useful. But from the other side, being able to use the Roman cancel to slow down your opponent's movement so you can get a bead on where they are, and therefore know which move to use, is even more useful. There are specific situations where the only thing stopping you from countering your opponent is knowing where they are in time to do the correct move. Once Kai is in this situation, with this much meter, he can generally afford to attempt to stand still, hold out the situation, and respond to pretty much anything he wants with Super. This is because Kai's defense is so good as a general thing, that a lot of Ino's approaches are based around trying to get into a specific space that he can't counter with anything else. At that point, it just becomes a question of awareness. Kai has a certain amount of momentum and advantage, and the only way for Ino to deal with it is probably to attack on her own terms. Even if she spaces herself perfectly, however, if Kai had enough momentum, he can afford to just use his super to cover the space that his other moves can't cover easily. And as you've noted, even if it fails, he still maintained most of what he wanted and can then make the decision as to whether or not he's going back in afterwards, or just gonna use all the space that was bought by doing it to play defense. It's at this spacing that he has to worry. He's got very little momentum in terms of building up meter by moving, but he still had enough of it to get through to the point where he could use the super if needed. However, since it's hard to bait Kai into using super randomly, the situation often shifts. now I have momentum advantage and a ton of movement. I had one invincible close range super, and there's a big payoff. My opponent similarly can use her super defensively rather than worrying about any Roman cancel stuff, knowing that my mindset is toward using my own. You can make very minor changes to your strategy based on the information that have fairly heavy leveraging results in matches. Of course, a lot of it does rely on both your execution and awareness, so we don't really suggest you treat this as a beginner thing. If you're having trouble keeping up with all the parts of a matchup, making sure your attention gauge balance is high is probably not good to have high on your list of priorities.
気をよたむよう親善試合第一開始。
お前はうちの店員ね。さあまかないあげるわろ。
ジャムさん勝利大勝。
色気の武器に頼りすぎね。そんなのいつまでも続かないよ。もっといいご飯食べて美肌貯金するよ。
アクセルマーカイノさん、シンさんは練れていますか。気をよたむよう親善試合第一開始。
And the birthday training returns.
野さんだよな。よし、もうしっかり覚えたよ。そろそろ3サイズも当てられそうだ。いやいや、冗談だから。そんな足黒雲みたいな目で見ないで。はい、イノさん、シュンさんは寝れていますか？気負い立たぬよう親善試合第一開始。今回は私親善試合第2勝者は1人。右か右か松井豪快右か私の勝ちです。ライブ通してはなくジャムさん、アクセル。シュンさんは寝れていますか？
理想と屋根は高っぽいね。クラウドベリーちゃん再始動ある。
クールな負け方考えとくな。気負い立たぬよう親善試合第一開始。
Generally, in this situation, for example, it's better to use the meter to punish the opponent for the constant button pressing, basically. Doing it the other way is generally just asking for trouble, as demonstrated there. If you know your opponent is going to generally press buttons in response to your pressure, and you have a metered option to prevent this, it's better to risk using it than be put in the situation where they get to do what they want. At that point, you need to convert your meter into damage rather than trying to conserve it for getting back in after they've knocked you back out or similar. After all, if you can avoid ever being knocked back out, it wouldn't matter. Similarly, in this situation, it's better to use the meter to defend yourself from the opponent who has lost the life lead. And just win on timeout or other, basically, lower tactics. Meter gives you more options, forcing your opponent to use their own in relatively risky situations. You can use this sort of thing to change the way your opponent thinks about the match if it suits you. That was an attempt at demonstrating how your instincts will eventually teach you the razor edge of exactly when you're going to have enough meter, based on how much tension balance you've built up. This takes quite a while to learn unless you have some knack or instinct for it. But going with your best guess is usually more likely to turn out useful and correct than not. So you can learn a lot of it that way. That said, we are now going into our final match of the night. I was going to say what it was, but the announcer did it for me. tomorrow we will be having Sandbag Casuals and Street Fighter 5 is just fine. With potentially one or two looks at some matches that were fought otherwise. Not really as an open mic segment as noted last time. We didn't actually end up doing it. But just a supplemental or a break. But generally expected to be learning style content as usual. On Thursday we should be having Carmen House lobbies as always. Once again, remember this is Dragon Ball FighterZ US East Coast. Usually we're on ring match priority lobby 02. I don't think we've had to be in any other for quite a while now. And we're not expecting any hiccups, weather, or commitments otherwise. On Friday, it's beginning to look like we're going to have yet another Dead or Alive 5 last round lounge, which will also be, once again, US East Coast. Loser stays on. That one has a bit of a restriction in that the game actually lets us specify a level for the upper level of skill, or at least rank given in the game, that can join the lounge. So feel free to join if you want to learn some stuff from there. Next Monday we will be back to our mission mashing lounge for Street Fighter 5. And of course, that brings us back around to another Tuesday train. The discussion in this one was not directly related to negative space, but it was in the sense that if you understand the tension changes, you can also recognize when your opponent is not necessarily doing as well with it as they maybe could be, and what advantage you can get out of that. And so with that spectacular show, we bid you good night. This has been Rillian 142MK. Enjoy your training. Good night, everyone.